Do you ever wonder why you can't resell your Steam game? Let's talk about that, because it is kind of an interesting case in the sense of like weird things happening. But I ask you, just listen to this without thinking that I have some. Just listen. Just listen. So originally, when we started Old Man Murray, we sold video games. We sold them really cheap, box copies. How did we get them so cheap? Like, they were insanely cheap. Well, there's this thing called the first sale doctrine in the US, and in the EU it's called the right of exhaustion. And the idea being is once somebody buys something, it's theirs. And like if I buy a car from Ford, it doesn't hurt Ford if I resell that car. And so I'm allowed to do that. And in this case, we were buying games that were destined for foreign markets that did not pay US taxes or those foreign taxes because they kind of fell off the boat and into our lap. Now, the companies that were doing this were doing something possibly illegal. That they would come and go, but they would still all have our same fax number. Yeah, we did faxes back then. It was magical. But for us, we were safe. And this is why I know about this, because I had a lawyer look at it because, hey, I don't want to get in trouble. And so the lawyer's like, yeah, no, you're safe because of first sale doctrine. I'm like, okay, cool. Okay. So this is how originally people thought EULAs would go, right? You buy a software license and it would be the same kind of thing. Well, here's the thing. It's different in the US than the EU. Let's talk about the US first. The US is more like buyer beware. Hey, you bought this thing. As long as they tell you about it, they can do whatever they want. And then there's kind of three rules to that. There's one, it can't be illegal. You can't say, hey, we're going to come kill your family or something like that, right? That's you can't do that. Two, you have to be able to read it, have time to read it. Ever notice, like when you install software now, when you're scrolling down, the agree won't come up until you go to the very bottom? That's because of that. And the other, it has to be plain language or understandable language. Now, it's often you'll see EULAs condensed, and there'll be some like, hey, this is what we're saying, and then there'll be the details, right? But also often sometimes you'll see really egregious language in there, and that's because they want to try to be really clear. They want to be legally covered to be able to do whatever they want. So they're going to say we can do whatever we want. And when they say that in such plain language, it sounds like they're being jerks, but really what they're doing is just covering their ass for legal reasons. Okay, so that's the U.S. and that is the U.S. and that applies to Steam, to everything, right? And that is how we're going forward. In the EU, though, it's a little different. There's a case called Usoft versus Oracle. And this was someone who wanted to buy Oracle licenses and resell them. And when first got dismissed, same as the US, and then one French court, I think it was French court or German court, was like, hey, and be clear, the EU is always interesting because it's a bunch of different courts that, much like we have state courts that kind of do this, the EU is a little bit the same, but not really. But it's a lot of different people can bring up points and worry about points, which we're going to get to. But here, for this case, the Supreme Court, or I think it was a German court, said, hey, you know what? They're allowed to do that. But we're going to put some stipulations on it. There's a bunch of stipulations, and the stipulation that ended up kind of sinking them was they had to prove that the people were done with the software. Like they weren't using it anymore. It was fully uninstalled. So like this court case just went on forever. And it never really had like the big ending to it because the software company that wanted to resell Oracle could never really prove the other thing from the people they were buying it from. So it just kind of faded away. But that is what we operated underneath for a long time. And then the French organization, a French consumer rights organization, I'm not sure if it's part of the government or not, but they said, hey, if this is true, we should be able to resell Steam games because we can prove that it's uninstalled. This will be great. They ran into a problem. So now first, when they did this, there was a preliminary ruling, man, all this stuff. Like, so the previous one was resolved like in 2008, and this took till just now to resolve this, right? So it takes forever. So don't think anything's going to happen quickly. But so the originally like, oh my God, yeah, we're going to be able to resell Steam games. And what happened was there was a different way of looking at games. And so what it was a French court said was, hey, the rights of exhaustion do not apply to games because they're what they call complex works. They are more than just software. They're art, they're music, they're writing, they're art. And so they are actually going to apply what's called the InfoSec directive. It's where you limit exhaustion to only tangible goods, but not to digital goods. This was an ebooks thing that happened and some stuff with Nintendo, but it got defined that games were this complex thing. And so that gave the rights to the people making it, the publishers and the developers, to choose to say, no, you can't resell them. And so that's cool, right? That they decided it's art, and that's why it drives me crazy when people are like, well, just release the source code. And it's like, man, games are so much more than that. Come on. But this is the courts officially saying that. But here's the thing. The reason the courts say this, and this is going to be, remember that blue yellow dress thing? This little phrase, this little sentence is going to be the one that is going to get read differently by everybody. And I am not making any calls for it. I am just going to describe it the way the legal papers do, okay? I called something punitive, and people got really mad at me for calling it punitive, thinking I was characterizing it as being a negative, when I was just saying, no, civil court cases where you try to penalize the person, give them a penalty, and not just make people whole, like say, hey, I had the software, I just want that software. But instead, you're actually going to inflict penalties on them. That's called punitive. It's just a legal term. It's not a judgment term. Same here. So the court concern raised in the Tom Cabinet ruling that allows for the resale of digital goods could harm the copyright holders. Unlike tangible goods, the digital goods do not deteriorate over time, making them the perfect substitute for the original, thereby eroding market exclusivity and profitability. Do not deteriorate over time. So you cannot resell them because they do not deteriorate over time. That phrase is going to be the phrase that this is all about. You know what I'm talking about. Right? And we try to say things are really simple. And we try to like, hey, I can write this legal thing, and you can't ever, because you let's say I worked for a company that wanted to lease an expensive piece of hardware to people to way to jumpstart that hardware. And so we looked into leasing, and let's just say we said we're going to be the nice lease guys, and we're going to write the easiest, like, hey, be cool, pay us, don't pay us, give it back. That's it. And you go look at lease agreements. I read a lot of lease agreements. I mean, there's like a car lease agreement that's like, hey, Jimmy's not allowed to rent this for his sister's wedding. Like, what Jimmy's doing at his sister's wedding? Like, right? Like, there's really specific things in there because everybody gets sued all the time. Companies get sued all the time. And so, and anybody can sue them for anything. And so you have to write the legal framework to handle that. And that's why these things get so complex, but yet equally, like for you, as they're saying, you got to have some common language in here so people can understand it. But so that's why you can't resell video games. But that description of why you can't resell video games is interesting. And that will probably be what gets discussed. Ignoring everything else, ignoring what that actually means. It's just saying, right now, in the EU, even stronger than in the US, they say, no, publishers and developers get to decide what happens to their game. But it's kind of like they're saying they get to decide that because of something. And if that something doesn't exist, do they still get to do that? And again, we're going to go into this realm now. And I'm not picking sides on this, because who knows? You can go to court 50 times and be right every single time, and then one time lose still, because who knows, right? But that's the rub. Oh, I just want to be really clear. I have no insight of the legal workings of companies I've worked for previously or anything else. When I originally started working there, we had started getting in a lawsuit with EFF. The next week, I came in wearing an EFF shirt because I told Holtman I agreed with them, not him. So yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but I think people are ignoring that there's a bunch of case law around some of these things being discussed and acting like there's a vacuum of law here when there's simply not. And that is very much different than some stuff like the privacy laws and stuff that came up that had a bigger impact. So just an interesting discussion point. Oh, and clearly I'm not a lawyer, but Boris is, and Boris has decided it is time for 7th breakfast.